Look at your to-do list right now. There's a task on it that you have been putting off for weeks. You keep telling yourself, I'll just do it tomorrow. You label yourself as lazy. You buy planners, download time management apps, and watch endless productivity hacks, but absolutely nothing changes. Why? Because you are fundamentally diagnosing the problem wrong. Procrastination has absolutely nothing to do with time management, and it is not laziness. It is a severe emotional regulation crisis. Today, we are going to dissect the brutal psychology of why you constantly delay your life and expose the terrifying truth of what you are actually running away from when you refuse to start. Let's start with the core psychological reality. You are not lazy. You are emotionally overwhelmed. When you look at a difficult, complex, or ambiguous task, your brain does not just see work, it sees a threat. It associates the task with negative emotions like frustration, incompetence, boredom, or the fear of looking stupid. Your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, perceives these negative emotions as psychological pain. So, what does a survival-driven brain do when it encounters pain? It avoids it at all costs. You do not procrastinate because you don't know how to do the work. You procrastinate because you do not want to feel the ugly emotions associated with it. When you suddenly decide to scroll through social media, binge watch a show, or even hyper-clean your kitchen instead of doing the work, it is not a lack of discipline. It is a desperate coping mechanism. You are seeking an immediate mood repair. You are essentially taking a cheap, psychological painkiller to numb the anxiety of the task. But the relief is entirely temporary, and the guilt that follows makes the task feel even more insurmountable the next day. The second, and perhaps most toxic driver of chronic procrastination, is perfectionism. We have been brainwashed to think of perfectionists as high achievers with flawless standards. In reality, perfectionism is a paralyzing form of self-sabotage. You have built up an idealized, flawless version of this project in your head, but the moment you actually sit down to write the first sentence, make the first phone call, or start the business plan, you are forced to confront a brutal reality. Your actual skills might not match your impossibly high expectations. If you never start, you never have to face that gap. The fantasy of your potential remains completely intact. Procrastination becomes a defense mechanism for your ego. If you wait until the very last minute, you give yourself the ultimate built-in excuse. If the result is mediocre, you can tell yourself, well, it wasn't my best work, but I only had one night to do it. Procrastination protects your fragile ego from the devastating possibility of giving 100% effort and still failing. You choose the guarantee of a delayed failure over the risk of trying your hardest and not being good enough. Why do you always wait until the absolute last minute, the night before the deadline, to finally get things done? Because you have conditioned your brain to rely on panic as a substitute for discipline. When a deadline is 3 weeks away, the logical part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, tells you to start, but the emotional part of your brain easily overpowers it, demanding comfort. However, when the deadline is only 12 hours away, the dynamic flips. Panic sets in. The fear of catastrophic consequences, losing your job, failing the class, destroying your reputation, finally outweighs the anxiety of doing the task. Your brain dumps a massive dose of adrenaline and cortisol into your system. This chemical flood acts like a psychological defibrillator, temporarily overriding your perfectionism and forcing you to act out of pure survival instinct. The dark truth is that you have addicted yourself to the stress cycle. You literally cannot function without an artificial crisis. You have turned your entire life into an exhausting, endless fire drill because you refuse to generate your own internal momentum. Finally, we must address the most common lie you tell yourself. I will feel more like doing it tomorrow. This is a recognized psychological phenomenon called the affective forecasting error. You falsely predict that your future self will somehow wake up with more willpower, more energy, and more motivation than your current self. Let me be brutally honest with you. Your future self is going to be just as tired, just as anxious, and just as unmotivated as you are right now. In fact, your future self will be even worse off because they will be carrying the compounded guilt of your present delay. By constantly pushing the friction to tomorrow, you aren't just delaying the work, you are committing an act of betrayal. You are forcing the severe consequences of your present cowardice onto your future identity. A true strategist understands a fundamental rule of human behavior. Motivation never precedes action. Action generates motivation. Waiting for the right mood or the perfect moment to strike is nothing more than a highly sophisticated way of choosing to fail. Procrastination is not a time management issue. It is fear disguised as delay. It is the fear of failure, the fear of judgment, and the profound inability to sit with temporary discomfort. The only way to break this destructive cycle is to stop waiting for the anxiety to disappear and start acting in spite of it. You must forgive yourself for not wanting to do the work, and then ruthlessly command yourself to do it anyway. Action is the only cure for overthinking. So, the only question left to ask yourself is this: what is the exact task you are going to attack the second this video ends?